Hey friends, my name is Quaglia, and in partnership with TECUM Ministries, I'm excited to bring you a short message today on the Beatitudes. If you're like me, you don't hear about the Beatitudes as much as you feel like you should. Just because of my line of work, being in full-time ministry, I spend a lot of time around church people, around church organizations, and I don't hear about the Beatitudes very often, which is kind of crazy considering they are like the highest level of teaching on spirituality and on what it is to be a person of compassion, what it is to be a person of deep joy and contentment. That word that is normally translated for blessed, in the Greek it also lines up with the word meaning happy. But actually, if you look a little bit further, there's a better translation beyond happy. It's like a deep state of contentment. It's not necessarily like a bubbly kind of want to skip around the room kind of happy. It's something much deeper than happiness. It's sort of this peace and contentment, a contentment that can be experiencing joy even in the midst of trial or discomfort, right? But also, I think the thing that's crazy about it is this is Jesus's first, if this is sort of the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, this is what he starts with. And he's describing the character of the people of God. He's describing the character of the people who follow him or will follow him. Where this is, it's kind of the beginning of his ministry. In chapter 3, he is baptized by John the Baptist. In chapter 4, he gathers his crew, his first disciples, and he starts to kind of build his movement. And now we're at the beginning of chapter 5, and Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 are sort of the Sermon on the Mount. And this is the very beginning of that. So this is Jesus describing the character of the people of God. This is Jesus describing the character we should be aiming for and the character of people who are walking in his ways. And so this is no small little chunk of scripture that should be ignored or disregarded. This is huge. And so I want to invite you, maybe if you feel like me, like you can kind of remember some of the Beatitudes. You're definitely familiar with them. You're not sure if you could write them all down by memory. I want to invite you with me to just return to the Beatitudes and see if we can't walk away from something really powerful today that is a reminder of who we're called to be as followers of Jesus. Well, let's get right into it. Let's start at the top. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, this one is kind of a funny one to start with because it always trips people up. What does that mean to be poor in spirit? And why is it blessed are the poor? We associate poor with poverty, with needing. And so is Jesus saying, blessed are they who are starving, who don't have a roof over their heads? Is that what he's trying to say? Is that some kind of cute and clever thing? And I think right away, by that one being first, it can turn people off. But actually, there's a really good reason that one is first. So who are the poor in spirit? Those who recognize their dependence on God. In Ignatian spirituality, they call this the principle and foundation, that the very basis, the very foundation of the person who is blessed, who experiences this deep contentment and joy, is that they recognize that they are completely dependent on God, that apart from him, they can do nothing, that he brought them into this world and he can take them out of this world, like maybe our parents used to say. It's been said often that if God were to ever stop thinking about you, you would cease to exist because you are constantly a thought in the mind and the heart of God, and he is constantly loving you into existence. Well, that might sound nice and flowery, but actually I think it's true, and I think it's humbling. If I could sum up this beatitude in one word, it would be that. It would be humility. To recognize that we are ultimately dependent on God. That's what it is to be poor in spirit. I think the person who is poor in spirit is not necessarily sad all the time, and is not necessarily living in poverty, but they do recognize their dependence on God. And in some ways that might be embracing a spirit of poverty in the sense that you don't rely on material possessions for your joy, for sure. That's part of recognizing your ultimate dependence on something that is not of this world. C.S. Lewis said, if I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world. Part of the lesson here is that it's not so much about being depressed, it's about being detached. Like, I don't want to be sad and moping around all the time, if that's what poor in spirit means, right? I don't want to leave a room and people go, wow, that Dom is one poor-spirited guy, But that's not what Jesus is asking of us. Someone who is poor in spirit is aware of their own weakness and their own frailty and their own need for God, their own dependence on God. And Jesus was speaking to a crowd of people who would have understood blessing and would have thought that blessing is to have great wealth and great worldly comfort, and that to be poor in spirit would be the opposite of that. Jesus is reminding us that only someone who embraces their lowliness can be lifted high. This next one, blessed are those who mourn. This always trips me up a little bit because I think sometimes I try to be really strong, whether it's in my marriage or whether it's with a group of friends or something that happens at work. I always try to be the strong one. Even when I'm alone, I try to take things on the chin and keep moving. And that can be exhausting. You know, sometimes it's a helpful way for me to get through something, but it can be exhausting. This beatitude always reminds me, it's okay to feel. It's okay to experience something and experience its effects and to feel the weight of something. Jesus himself wept, both in private and in the company of others. It was not beneath God himself to mourn. It was not a sign of weakness. It was not a lack of faith. In fact, maybe mourning is a great act of faith because it is something deep within you crying out to God. Now, it's true that we shouldn't let our hearts be troubled, but we shouldn't let them become numb either. Pope Francis said that a Christian who is without joy is either sick or not a Christian, and surely there's truth to that. We shouldn't walk around being joyless people, but it doesn't mean that we have to be so numb to where we don't feel anything. When bad things are happening, we just act oblivious to them. That's not the point. Mourning is a part of the human experience, and specifically it's a part of the Christian experience because it allows us to turn to the Comforter. Blessed are the meek. You know, meekness is not necessarily a quality that most people honor. Meekness is not exciting or sexy or attractive. It doesn't gain a bunch of followers typically. It doesn't, point to itself. It doesn't demand attention. And sometimes it doesn't even seem like it's like the attitude of a leader. And I want to hopefully flip some of that on its head because while meekness is sort of the opposite of pride, it is not the opposite of leadership. It's not the opposite of taking initiative. Meek does not mean weak. Now, someone who is meek may be gentle and they may be kind, but that should not be mistaken for weakness. Someone who is meek would be quite powerful, but seek first to work things out peacefully before resorting to exerting their force or exerting their power to manipulate others. This doesn't mean that you're so lackadaisical and not rooted that you can be swayed by the wind. No, not at all. But you'll be gentle because there is no strength like gentleness. Now, the loud think they're in control and the rich think they own the land. But Jesus says the meek will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Well, first I want to start with the second half of that, for they will be satisfied. I love that assurance. For me, it takes a little bit of the anxiety out of the righteousness that I hunger and thirst for. It takes a little bit of the worry that it's all on me. Jesus says, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness will be satisfied because righteousness will prevail. And I just love that promise. But let's go back to the beginning. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. It's hard not to imagine immediately those crying out for justice. In our streets, people protesting, right? There is something really beautiful and powerful to that expression of a peaceful protest, demanding justice, demanding that the voices of the oppressed be heard, demanding that people be treated with justice and with respect. See, it isn't enough just to simply think those things are a good idea. Jesus says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for them. And what do you notice about hunger and thirst? They let you know they're there. They express themselves in an inner growl. They lead you to seek out the solution. When you're thirsty, you find water. When you're hungry, you find food. They don't just let you ignore them. And if they do for a short period, but certainly not forever. So hungering and thirsting for righteousness requires action. It will move you into action. And Jesus promises that you will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Matthew chapter 6, verse 14 says this, if you forgive others their transgressions, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your transgressions. You know, everyone is a big fan of mercy until it's them that needs to show mercy. We love to receive it, but giving it is a lot harder. Jesus was speaking to a crowd of people in this particular age, and maybe even perhaps today, where mercy was a really unfamiliar and unpopular idea. Getting even was king. Giving someone what they deserved, that was true justice. And Jesus invites us to what was then and is now a revolutionary idea: to forgive. My friends, the burden of a grudge is far too heavy to carry your whole life. One practical way to try to do this, which is still a little bit abstract, is to forgive the way we've been forgiven, right? Not just to measure out mercy in little portions depending on how we think people deserve it. We don't have to be the judge and jury. We know we have been completely forgiven, and we should be trying to completely extend that complete forgiveness to the people in our lives. See, it turns out mercy isn't just the cup we get to drink from, it's the cup we get to share with others. We get to empty out on the people around us. That's the challenge. Blessed are those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they will see God. You know, this is something that even David, the psalmist, who scriptures call a man after God's own heart, God says, this is a man after my own heart. Even David had to ask for this. Psalm 51:12, create in me a clean heart, O God, and within me renew a steadfast spirit. You know, we're all at risk of having impure motives. We're all at risk of being corrupt in small ways. Sin corrupts, and we all have the capacity to sin, right? The challenge, I think, is to constantly get back on course, because as life happens, we do get knocked off course. And it's been said before that the enemy probably wants to knock us off course just a little bit at a time so we don't even notice it's happening. But over the course of a long journey, we'll miss our destination by a long shot. So we have to just constantly be refocusing on the Lord, reassessing the situation, seeing where the Lord is, and constantly turning back towards Him. I think someone who's pure of heart listens more than they speak. A pure heart can experience God's love like no other. You know, when Peter came to recognize Jesus, the scriptures say, flesh and blood did not reveal this to you. You know, it was a gift. The pure heart is given the gift of being able to see the Lord the way only a pure heart can. And it's not even something that the pure heart has earned. It's a gift. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Jesus is telling us how the people who are in the family of God behave. They make peace. They strive to make peace. You know, in Romans chapter 12, St. Paul says, if at all possible, do everything in your power to live at peace with everyone. Now, that's much easier said than done. Clearly, there's going to be disagreements. You know, things are going to disrupt the peace. But members of the family of God, as the Beatitudes says, those who are called the children of God, they strive for peace. Now, don't make a mistake here. We're still called to love, and sometimes loving disrupts the peace. Sometimes loving someone and disagreeing with someone happen at the same time. We're supposed to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. This isn't what the culture tells us to do, but this is what Jesus tells us to do. Aquinas said to love is to will the good of the other. So sometimes you're going to will the good for somebody, or what you perceive to be the good for somebody, but it isn't what they want, and there's going to be tension, there's going to be disagreement. Now we know Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and Scripture says many, many times that God is a peacemaker, that He came to bring peace. But then there's also a confusing verse that maybe can shine a little bit of light on some of the confusion around this for us. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 10, do not think that I have come to bring peace. No, in fact, I have come to bring the sword. And He talks about man being set against his father and daughter being set against her mother. And there's, division in that verse. And you kind of think, well, wait a minute, Jesus came for that? I thought He came to bring peace. I thought He was the Prince of Peace. And I thought the little baby born in Bethlehem and grew up and was trying to get us all to live at peace. Well, what Jesus is saying is sometimes your allegiance to me is going to set you, in a certain sense, against other people, because you are going to stand for something. You're going to live by something, and sometimes it's going to disrupt the peace a little bit. But He says, don't thrive in that division. Don't take joy from the fact that people are being set against each other. At all times, like St. Paul said, work for peace. When you have a grudge against someone, still greet them, still welcome them, still love them. The person you are looking at who you are disagreeing with is not your enemy. They are your brother or your sister. We have one enemy. And as long as we stay close to the God of peace and entrust all of these things to Him, He will help us to be peacemakers in the best way that we can be. And we shall be called the children of God. And then I'll combine these last two. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Further, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account, Jesus says. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. This is an invitation for us to be unashamed of the gospel and to be unashamed of living a life that in many ways is radical, especially when you lift it up to the culture of today. It's a radical life to follow the Lord and to live these Beatitudes. It will challenge people. It will make people uncomfortable. It will often set you apart from what is popular. And it may not always be in some grand fashion. It could just be smiling at a grumpy person. It could be making a stand in front of family or friends or strangers about something that you know to be true. It could be small, could be big, but it's every day. It's little by little. You just chip away with love, and it may not look like much. It may not even be much, but it is what it is at the present moment. It is what is being given to you, and this is what you're doing with it. Because the present moment is where we're needed. That's where, as Christians, we are called to show up. And we will receive the grace in those small moments that we'll need later on for the big moments. So don't shy away from these small ways of living these Beatitudes. I hope that these will be a blessing and an encouragement and almost a training for you as they have been for Christians for the last 2,000 years. And I'm praying for you. Hope you'll do the same for me as I strive to live these Beatitudes. Take care.